Read a very long piece in Epic Times talking about Epic Times, a great newspaper, EPOCH. These experts advocated for lockdowns. Now they say they were wrong. You know, when all of this stuff about we should lock down society in a different way, get rid of cars, regulate how much people travel, and other draconian measures, because scientists tell us, not science, but scientists and science are not the same thing. Scientists told us to close schools. It was the biggest stupidity of my lifetime in terms of the mass destruction that it created. Why people still think that listening to experts that the New York Times and NPR advocate is a good idea proves the ability of people to learn nothing, not just from history, from what happened 2 years ago. I read to you, as the dust settles from the COVID-19 pandemic and the fallout over lockdown policies becomes more pronounced, some lockdown proponents, such as New York University professor Scott Galloway, have conceded they were wrong for supporting lockdowns. I was on the board of my kid's school during COVID. I wanted a harsher lockdown policy, Mr. Galloway told Bill Maher on Maher's real-time program. In retrospect, I was wrong. The damage to kids of keeping them out of school longer was greater than the risk. But here's the bottom line. Myself, our great people at the CDC, I'd like to think the governor, we were all operating with imperfect information, and we were doing our best, he said, referring to then New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. By the way, remember when I mocked Cuomo for his statement, if all this saves one life, it will have been worth it? Yeah. Do you know that almost immediately I knew the lockdowns were an idiotic idea? You don't need to be a scientist to have common sense. What you do is you weigh the evidence, and you weigh the advantages with the disadvantages. That is what a person who seeks truth does, not a person who thinks they have been given the truth. There are two types of people: those who believe they have been given the truth, and those who seek the truth. There's a big difference between them. Dr. Ari Jaffe, a clinical professor of pediatrics at the University of Alberta in Canada and an attending physician in pediatric critical care medicine, initially supported lockdowns. So did Kevin Bass, a seventh-year medical student and researcher at a Texas medical school. Both now say they were wrong because of groupthink and fear-mongering, rather than imperfect information. That Galloway is still a little smitten with, he thinks, the decency and integrity of the CDC. I don't believe that. Both push back against Mr. Galloway's notion that the powers that be were, quote, doing their best. Mr. Bass, who said at the beginning of the pandemic he was a hardcore COVIDian, someone who elevated COVID-19 prevention and mitigation almost to the level of a religion, said the Imperial College's modeling highly influenced his initial support for lockdowns, as did reports from the World Health Organization. Remember that, by the way, Imperial College? They're responsible for a lot of damage. Have they ever apologized? Okay, here's my motto, one of my many, which is, I wrote this 40 years ago, literally. Being on the left means never having to say you're sorry. They said it kills 3.4% of the people it infects. That was the World Health Organization's figure until early April, 3.4%. That's way too many people. That's like 1 out of every 30 people is going to die, Mr. Bass told the Epoch Times. The modeling was flawed, and in general, modeling forecasting failed during the pandemic. This was because the models were based on flawed assumptions and non-transparent methods. That is what I believe motivates a great deal of the hysteria with regard to climate change. Flawed assumptions that are the basis of models and non-transparent methods. Dr. Jaffe said. Dr. Jaffe said that he also saw the effects of lockdowns on students at the university and came to recognize that his support of lockdowns was from a privileged position that, quote, failed to recognize that loneliness, unemployment, and adverse childhood experiences are top risk factors for shortened lifespan, mental health problems, and chronic non-communicable diseases. Plus, he had, quote, failed to recognize that missing school will affect an entire generation with reduced social development, executive function, i.e., decision-making ability, earning potential, and future lifespan, and lead to marked increases in adverse mental health outcomes, unquote. Once he recognized these facts, Dr. Jaffe began researching lockdowns, and his paper was published on February 26, 2021. I'll continue with this. It's really, really important. People were profoundly misled because they were taught at college to trust experts. They will explain why that's a bad idea in the course of this article. Back in a moment.